industry.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, we were super early in DeFi, and it's always felt like crypto has been this industry of double standards, right? We preach decentralization, but most people, even Bitcoiners, hardcore Bitcoiners, still use centralized exchanges, and we take the short route to security, to decentralized, and a lot of DeFi is operated by regulated stablecoins, and that is really the Achilles heel of the industry. When I think of the success of Luna, I think it's been largely, and I tell this to most people, is I think you took a very consumer-centric approach from the very beginning. You said, let's build something that has underlying utility, not just speculation. Because most algorithmic stablecoins, this is what a time I'd invest in Basis coin or Basecoin. And look, it's fascinating game theory, but it's fragile, especially at the very beginning. Whereas I think if you have the underlying bedrock of I think you guys were approaching it from, let's get Chai, this wallet, to be used by a lot of people in e-commerce. Sure, we'll have incentives for people to use this wallet versus Kakao or some other solutions out there. But if you have that underlying kind of bedrock, then there is more stability in the long term. I would succinctly describe it as utility brings stability to a stable coin, especially an ambitious one that is meant to be decentralized. Much to my detriment, I actually passed on Terra because I had invested in Basecoin, and I felt that it was like, all right, like game theory is fascinating, but these things are very experimental, very risky. But here you are today, to my understanding, you guys are widely used in Korea. You've expanded very regionally. I think you've gone to places like Thailand, where the central bank has had objections to what you guys were doing, and a lot of it in Asia. Maybe you can just give us a quick rundown of over the years, because it's been I think you were starting in 2017, 2018, right? That's when you guys kind of launched. So give us like a quick rundown of what has happened to where you are today, which is one of, if not kind of the most exciting decentralized stablecoin out there. But it wasn't a very linear, straightforward path to get there. So I'm curious if you could share with us kind of that trajectory, maybe in a nutshell, and then we can go deeper.
Well, I mean, so I think the interesting thing about Terra is that I think the sort of the moderate success that we've had so far can largely be attributed to like us sort of relinquishing control over time. So if you think about if you go back to Terra in like 2018 and 2019, the entire thesis was payments, right? So the idea was that we would, bootstrap a large network of merchants and users that are willing to transact using Terra. And then we would use that to, and that would sort of build a network of people that are willing to hold and transact using the currency. And we would be able to, build, store value applications and things like that on top. But, yeah, and I think we've had some reasonable success with that. So we've launched apps like Chai in Korea. So the idea was that we would close the retail loop with things that people can buy and transact with using, Terra payments. So you could take it to most e-commerce merchants of your choice. I could go to movie theaters, convenience stores, and things like that. And because it sort of natively hooks up to the Terra Station wallet as well, like you could, live off of your staking rewards, for instance, which makes the Luna flywheel that much more interesting. And then if you don't want to do that, you could just top up using your bank account balance. And then in the background, the app will purchase stablecoins for you and then, onboard you to the rails. But I guess the main problem with that type of approach is that given, we sort of had most of the control over the full stack experience. So we were building the blockchain, we were building smart contract, payment systems on top of it, and then we were building a payments company. That sort of was very difficult to build an entire ecosystem around it. So with only one innovator on top of the Terra blockchain, it was relatively hard to compete against other ecosystems that had hundreds, if not thousands of developers. And I think at some point we sort of learned that lesson and then sort of went into a more ecosystem building approach, where we spun out Chai into a separate entity. And then we spent a lot of time thinking about how would you make Terra stablecoins itself really useful instead of trying to build a company that happens to use Terra stablecoins. And then the rest is history.
Would you say that the focus today is more on the ecosystem and inviting developers? I mean, the Cosmos SDK is kind of, there's a lot of developers out there building. So it's fairly easy for someone to come into their ecosystem and just build whatever application they want. And to date, you've seen a host of projects some of which I'm an investor in, like Anchor, for instance, which is savings, more savings centric, and then Mirror, which allows you to invest in kind of, stocks. So there's added layers of utility now in the Terra ecosystem. Is payments still a primary kind of gateway, a necessary evil, if you will, maybe like running at a cost, or just you have to always kind of have it there? Or is that no longer the focus for you guys?
So I've sort of over time developed a thesis on why crypto is important. And so the way that I think about it is that crypto is, so the reason why I think crypto is interesting is because it sort of allows people to migrate to the internet faster than before. And, think about it. So like prior to Web3, people spent most of their time in the physical world and only went to the internet to consume information, talk to people, or watch porn. In some cases, all three of these things were the same. And the reason for this is because there's no property rights on the internet. You can't own things. I mean, you still can't own things, right? So, for example, let's say Mark Cuban and a middle school child would have the same property rights on the internet. You can own the same LinkedIn page, you can own the same Twitter profile, but it's not possible to construct properties, right? Things that you can own, which meant that people are doing most of their economic activities off-chain, off the internet, and then was only spending a limited amount of time on the internet, right? But this can change with Web3 because now you finally have property rights on the internet. So it's a transition from the internet from being communist to capitalist, which I think is a really big tectonic change. And this allows you to spend the vast majority of your time online, like you guys do, probably.
Definitely. I would largely agree with that. The pushback, and I describe this too, which is like there's a theory of economic development by this guy, economist called Hernando de Soto, says the countries that have developed the fastest are the ones that had property rights. So like the US, for instance, had property rights, had a legal framework to property rights allowed you to borrow against your property, get you credit that spurred innovation and entrepreneurship and all this stuff. Places like Egypt, no property rights, difficult to get credit when you don't have property. Now, before in your LinkedIn example, people might say, wait a minute, well, someone kind of owns LinkedIn as a company has a lot of value. And I said, yes. But I think what you're saying is, which is important, I think, for people to realize is it transfers ownership and property to the creator. And sure, you could argue that if you upload a picture on Shutterstock and people are like ripping it and copying it, the same way that people were copying music back in the 90s with like Napster and LimeWire, you had to rely on a system in the real world to enforce what is this property, right? You would sue someone and then it's a messy process, and any IP lawyer would tell you, yeah, this works because they profit and lawyers always win in this battle, but not so much the artist, not so much the creator. Whereas now you have the ability to create this property that is enforced by math.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like what you're talking about, Doe, is like, if I had to summarize what you're saying in one sentence, it's previously, but like pre-Web3, you basically had play was on the internet and work and play was in the physical life. And what Web3 is allowing you to do is actually take that work element because of property rights, and now you can actually work on the internet. So is that, I don't know, it kind of feels like that's the thesis a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me actually, I mean, it feels like when I'm looking at this from an outsider, like I see you, like the entrepreneur and the founder, it feels like there's kind of been three steps, right? And it's really interesting. I mean, you've built this whole open market operation without a centralized entity. It's fascinating to watch. It feels like step one was closing, you called it the retail loop, but really it's like the money loop. You closed the money loop in Korea with Chai. So that was like step one. And then you're like, oh wait, we need to do more things because money's not just about spending, it's about saving and investing. So then step two was you had to go out and build the platforms. So you guys built things like, and the ecosystem built like Anchor and Mirror and other platforms like that to allow you to save and invest and obviously spend with Chai. And now we're moving on to stage three, it feels like, where you're like, all right, great. We've got all the platforms to let you do things with your money. Now we need to build confidence in the reserves and actually turn this money into like, because money is about the demand, but it's also about the mentality of money.
Pure social construct.
Yeah, the pure social construct. And now that's it feels like we're moving into step three with like LFG and buying Bitcoin. Is this how you see it in these stages or?
Yeah. Although I think with LFG's purchase of Bitcoin, a lot of people understand the economic argument. So why it's good to have an exogenous asset that stabilizes the price of Terra. But I think most people are missing the diplomatic argument. And the diplomatic argument is as follows. So when Terra was the main stablecoin of the Terra ecosystem, and it got pretty big on just being that, right? Like Terra is the second largest smart contract platform by TVL in crypto. But the ambition isn't to be the largest stablecoin in the Terra ecosystem. It's to be the largest stablecoin, period. We would like to be the decentralized money or some set of decentralized money. We would like that to quote all liquidity in crypto. We would like that to be the main quote currency across all liquidity pools in DeFi. We would like these decentralized stablecoins to basically allow the rest of the DeFi stack that's built on top to be set free. And in order to do that, you need to build confidence for users that are outside of the Terra ecosystem. So if you look at lunatics that are using Terra, like UST on Terra, there's no objection that Luna is a quality reserve asset. Like if you talk to any Terra user, they'll be like, yeah, don't worry about it. Luna's backing it. But if you talk to an average user on Ethereum, for instance, or on Solana, they don't share the same confidence for lots of different reasons, right or wrong. But the idea is that in order for us to be able to expand to chains where, natural affinity with Luna is less, then you need neutral reserves that can build user confidence in UST. And we felt like that asset was Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting observation where, my foregone conclusion around like seeing all the other experiments, because this space of algorithmic stablecoins, ambitious, but is littered with failed experiments, basis, ESD, ESD. And look, as you say, it's still very early stage and experimental, but it is felt that you guys have broken out, and I would attribute it to utility again. Payments is a big part of that. Actual non-speculative activity, backing and supporting the reason why you'd want to use this stablecoin, other than just I want to play the Ponzonomics. And I think, in what version, and feel free to push back, like in what version does this derail? Like removing kind of like political stuff and all this stuff, which could make your life difficult from the consumer standpoint. Like, if like the Bank of Thailand, I think, tried to do this, which is anyone in Thailand's using this, we're going to like make your life super difficult, which by the way is like an argument that applies not only to a stable coin, it could be for Bitcoin too. So like, I want to remove that from the equation because that's always a risk that we climb in this industry, although I think diminishing. But what would be like the reasons why, like, that you're mostly kind of worried about? I think it's been pretty interesting to see even Bitcoiners like Pomp, for instance. The guy has never tweeted about DeFi ever. I think he missed the boat. He's sour about it. Now he's going out and saying, hey, look, people should look at what Terra is doing as embracing kind of the Bitcoin standard. And it's been interesting to observe that even like more diehard Bitcoiners have endorsed you guys or just have been coming out supporting you because all of a sudden you kind of win over that community. So it's a pretty interesting kind of business development strategy that you mentioned. But I'm curious.
I mean, that feels like the most by the way, Santi, I just want to add to that. That feels like one of the most important things about this LFG, the Bitcoin buy, is like ignoring the benefits of like the peg stability and anti-bank run and things like that. The Bitcoin purchase in my mind is so freaking smart because everyone in crypto views Bitcoin as like this hard reserve currency, right? And it's almost non-tribal everyone thinks of the Bitcoin Max as like very tribal, but it's very non-tribal when it comes to the smart contract wars and like the platform wars. And it feels like it's very targeted in going after the Bitcoin community because that's a completely untapped area as it relates to DeFi, right? It's this win-win where all the smart contract L1 communities respect Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And then you kind of get the Bitcoin community aligned with UST. Or even if you get them adopting DeFi, like that's a massive win, not just for Terra, not just for Bitcoin, but the entire space. And I actually think, Doe, I'm sure you saw the Avalanche bridging with Bitcoin. Like I think this could be the first move in all of these L1s are going to integrate with Bitcoin in some way, in my mind. But
so now that you have this attention from the Bitcoin community, Doe, how do you actually start them to use UST? Because they might love it. They're like, yeah, this guy, these guys are going to buy a bunch of Bitcoin. Great. Pump my bags. Fine. Great. But how do you, like, what is your strategy to actually bridging and bringing utility, a DeFi ecosystem in Bitcoin that has been non-existent?
Well, so I think it's a couple of things. So I sort of think about the Bitcoin community as the well, like in some ways, like the middle class of crypto in some sense. So what I mean by this isn't to say that Bitcoiners aren't rich. They're very rich, but you have a lot of people in the Bitcoin community that are very casual users, right? So which means that they hold crypto, they might transact with it, they might have a crypto.com card, they might give money to their friends or family on holidays as in the form of Bitcoin. So they could be like very small time evangelists. I felt like what we're trying to do with this is to build neutrality. We're trying to build, bridges to lots of different ecosystems. And Bitcoin is the only asset in crypto that I feel like that doesn't have controversy, right? So for example, if you try to build up reserves in Ethereum, for instance, which honestly, I think it could go up more, right? There's higher beta, right? But if you try to take that asset and then bridge it to, let's say, the Solana ecosystem, there is going to be like a decent amount of, political dissent and tribalism there, like rejecting the efficacy of that asset versus Sol. Whereas if it's backed by BTC, even if it doesn't move as much, like people are going to, nobody's going to question whether Bitcoin is an appropriate asset. So as Terra starts to scale its presence across multiple different chains and become a cross-chain asset, we felt like Bitcoin would and should be, holding the majority of the reserve bandwidth.
Do you stop at Bitcoin or do you go and do other stuff?
I think we should eventually diversify the reserve a little bit and then hold different types of assets. But I think it should start from, like a position of strength as LFG and, the Terra reserves being the largest single wallet holder of Bitcoin.
Right.
And then I think it can transition to other things.
A lot of what we've seen in DeFi has been this political game, right? You see curve wars, you see, the power now of governance tokens and influencing certain parameters that, in many ways, like you see this in the real world. You see governing bodies and you see, the IMF and the World Bank and the UN and governments, the U.S. government having, a privileged position in the global monetary system because everyone adopts the dollar as a reserve asset and, whatever. I'm curious, like, how do you see this? Do you see that like coming more and more to DeFi? And what does that make you guys in terms of where are we in 5 years from a DeFi? I mean, I don't want to just limit it to DeFi, but like from an ecosystem perspective, like, is Terra the most widely used smart contracting platform? What does that mean? If you continue to buy more and more Bitcoin, you're the largest Bitcoin holder, or one of the largest Bitcoin holders, like you have a pretty interesting and privileged position in this entire industry. Like, do you think about that? Is that something that is on your mind? Like this politicization of crypto, which hasn't been like, we have tribalism, but that's like inherent in human nature, but not like politics. I think like we've relegated politics and said, no, code is law, but we're now somehow becoming more politicized. And so I'm curious if you believe that. And if so, kind of what is your role in this entire industry?
Well, I don't know if I've done enough soul searching to be able to accurately answer that question.
So are you the crypto president?
I was like, I'm just trying to build out here, man. I'm just trying to build.
Well, I mean, so one thing that I have a lot of certainty on is that over time, like we are going to stay in a multi-chain world. And the reason for this is because, well, block space is finite. So that means that similar to how not everybody can live in New York City, there's going to be multiple different, blockchains with different characteristics. And I think over time, they're going to develop different culture, and some applications which are overlapping, but some applications that are unique to each chain. Similar to how there would be different cultural differences when you are spending time in Japan versus you're spending time in Germany. I think you're already starting to see some of those cultural differences pop up in each of the communities in Web3. Now, what I think is going to happen over time is, like, one of the unanswered questions is whether we're going to live in a multi-chain world versus a cross-chain world, right? So whether, you're going to have different assets that are bridged across different blockchains, whether there's going to be applications that sit across multiple blockchains. Mm-hmm. And the bet that we're making is that the answer to that is yes, right? And I think Terra's role in sort of this cross-chain world that we foresee is to be is to be sort of, like the core currency or the stablecoin that sits across multiple different blockchain ecosystems. Yeah. I sort of see my role as, helping that future happen a little bit faster rather than not. And besides that, like the Bitcoin purchase is not even my money. So
you're right. Yeah, exactly. So I want to go back to this with you. I think is really important. We talk about, the internet, right? The internet, no one really cares. There's standards in the internet stack, HTTPS and all these other parts of the stack. And as a user, most people don't think about how things work in the background, and you just route stuff and packets, and that's fine. We are in crypto this distinction of, is a user comes to a wallet and wants to swap an asset or play a game and then swap an asset, he's really not going to care where this happens, whether it's transacted in Uniswap in Ethereum or Uniswap in an AMM in Solana or whatever in Terra. He's just going to want to get the best execution, best price, whatever. And so in many ways, there's no kind of brand affiliation to the L1, if you will. There are diehard folks today because you have you have a vested interest in supporting Ethereum or Solana or Cosmos or Terra, if you will. But it's very early stages, right? We could probably all agree here that there doesn't feel like there's going to be a lot of brand affiliation to the L1. Perhaps maybe Terra is different because, to your point, maybe the payments, and if you think about the stablecoin underpinning the L1, because you kind of guys have built a full stack in many ways, which is different than a lot of other kind of more generalized. For a long time, I felt Ethereum was trying to boil the ocean. I'm like, okay, fine. It's really fascinating that you can do smart contracts, but what's a killer use case? And I was looking for it. In that journey, I ended up investing in other competing L1s because I said, look, at some point you need to bring utility to this, and you need to show the world why you're going to use this technology. And the same with that, email kind of made the internet, like, it was kind of the aha moment. You guys have gone and done the full stack, and I think it's really interesting. But your point around multi-chain and cross-chain.
In recent press interviews or at book signings and speaking engagements, people have been asking what's next for me now that my book is out. Well, I'm happy that I'm finally able to announce what I'll be working on. Today, Law and Crime, the leading live trial and true crime network, and I announced that we will be collaborating on an investigative podcast series that explores the case of Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan, the couple who have been accused of attempting to launder $4.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. The series will be a deep dive into the story to understand the married couple at the center of it, how they allegedly attempted to launder the Bitcoin stolen from Bitfinex, and then to look more closely at the clues that led to their arrest. I'm thrilled to be partnering with Law and Crime to tell this tale about stolen Bitcoin with the depth and level of detail it deserves. It will be a fascinating journey not only into the lives of this couple that has already captivated the internet, but into how blockchain sleuthing enabled the government to track them down. We have a press release out about it today, which you can read on Law and Crime. So if you're interested in learning more, check out the Unchained Daily newsletter today and tomorrow, and or my Twitter feed. Also, as usual, I have upcoming book events for my book tour. So you can also find these at laurashin.com. Like why this interview may not cover as much territory as I would typically cover in an interview. However, for those who want to hear more from Doe, he did appear on the chopping block last week, so make sure to check out that episode. Okay, so I'm just going to start with some exposition so we can, make sure everybody's up to speed, but also, minimize the amount of time that you spend talking about this stuff. So you can feel free to tweak anything that I say. But as much as you were going to make about how it's being backed, and it used to be that in order to mint, say, 10 UST, you would have to burn $10 worth of Luna, which is the staking token of Terra. But obviously, you changed how that works. So why don't you explain what
USD, which is a stable coin pegged to $1. You need to burn $1 worth of Luna in order to do so. And then on the other side of the trade, if you're looking to redeem 1 Terra USD, you can trade it into the blockchain and get $1 worth of Luna back in return. So the idea is that Luna, as the staking asset, expands and contracts the supply to absorb the demand volatility for Terra stablecoins. We've had some pretty good success with this. So Terra USD is currently the 4th largest stablecoin in the world at roughly around $16 billion in market cap. And by, I think, within a relatively recent future, looking at its current growth trajectory, I think it's going to be number 3 relatively soon. So we recently made announcements whereby we're bootstrapping a large decentralized forex reserve in the form of Bitcoin. So we've initially seeded this reserve with about $3 billion in assets, and we're in the process of converting all those exogenous assets into Bitcoin. And then we have plans to grow this to some meaningful percentage of USD market cap within the next year.
And why did you decide to make that change?
Well, so a couple of things. So the first is algorithmic stablecoins. So a system whereby Luna absorbs demand volatility for USD is reasonably robust. And as Luna market cap grows, it's going to get more and more robust. But it also has the downside that in sort of drastic changes in demand, you could lead to death spiral situations where, the price of Luna is falling at the same time as the money supply of USD is contracting. In the beginning, when Terra was, focusing on a limited number of use cases where, the largest developer on the Terra ecosystem was Terraform Labs, which was the company that I founded. But now it's actually one of the largest ecosystems in the world. So by TVL, it is the second largest smart contract platform after Ethereum. By usership, it's probably around that rank. And then the number of applications that are being built on Terra ranges from, let's say, leverage applications to options to Forex to, interest rate swaps to dog coins like Dogecoin and so many different things, that it becomes harder and harder to reason about the demand volatility for Terra stablecoins. There's also lots of Terra stablecoins that have been exported to different blockchains. Like, for example, UST is the largest used and the largest TVL and the most frequently used pool on Curve Finance on Ethereum, for instance. One of the largest on Saber on Solana, one of the largest on Trader Joe on Pangolin on Avalanche. So all combined, sort of the size of the economy that is being built on Terra stablecoins is becoming larger and less predictable. So it stands to reason that similar to how a lot of export-based economies in the real world provision forex reserves to sort of control the short-term demand fluctuations in its currency, it became a natural choice for Terra to provision its own forex reserve as well. Except, in line with what we're trying to do here, it made sense to do this in a decentralized fashion by setting up smart contracts against which people can trade in Bitcoin to mint more UST and vice versa, redeem USD against Bitcoin.
So we're going to explore that a little bit more, but I also want to understand, so since previously it was Luna essentially that was backing UST, now what will be the role for Luna going forward?
Well, so you can think about this as a fractional forex reserve, right? So in the sense that before, in order to mint 1 Terra USD, you were burning $1 worth of Luna. Now it's going to be a little bit different, whereby when you mint 1 Terra USD, some Luna is going to get burned, and some Luna is going to be used to provision this decentralized forex reserve. So you can think about like a portion of UST seigniorage going to provision a large reserve of exogenous assets like Bitcoin.
So basically, what I read was that when people, I guess, are kind of exiting Terra, that they can either redeem that for $1 worth of UST, they could redeem that for $1 worth of Luna or 99 cents worth of BTC, but that you guys will try to, well, actually, I don't know this part. If you're trying to maintain the reserves at like roughly 60% Luna and 40% BTC, or if it's just that, because there's some ratio there around, 60% of Luna and I guess what is it? You're burning 60% of Luna and then using 40% of that to buy BTC or something? Can you?
Yeah, so it's not a reserve ratio per se. It's more that, when UST is being minted, some ratio, which we don't know yet, it could be 40%, be higher or lower, would be used to acquire Bitcoin. So it's as if like UST seigniorage is being used to build up BTC reserves.
Okay. And so then that ratio will be flexible based on whatever other factors. And will it be the DAO?
Right. Bitcoin volatility.
Oh, Bitcoin volatility. And will it be the DAO that decides that ratio, or Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
Correct.
Because oftentimes, these proposals can take a while. So how flexible and quick do you think they'll be able to react to market volatility?
Well, so for example, if we build up Bitcoin reserves at around like 40% of seniorage, here's what I think about it. So first is, I think it'll take rare events for UST supply to contract by 40% in a short-term time period. So at a 40% reserve ratio, I feel like we would be collateralizing more than we need to, especially because the core stability mechanism is still Luna. But what the Bitcoin reserves will play a part in doing is that it will prevent debt spirals because it would drastically slow down the pace by which new Luna is being minted to facilitate redemptions. Second, I think in a long-term arc, we plan to be one of the largest, if not the largest, single wallet holder of Bitcoin, the Terra protocol itself. And I think over the long arc, the price of Bitcoin is going to do well. So I think the reserve ratio that we end up with in the long term is going to be a lot higher than the reserve ratio that we paid for at acquisition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But then within kind of a shorter time frame, maybe like from year to year, since obviously Bitcoin can be quite volatile against USD, and also since crypto assets overall tend to be correlated with each other, how would that affect the stability of UST?
Yeah, so I would say if I were to put in my financial planner hat, the worst case would be if we were buying Bitcoin now and then a crash happened 6 months later and it's correlated with a massive fall in the demand for UST, then we would have paid for Bitcoin that we would allow redemptions for at a much cheaper price, right? So this sort of coincidence of three different events coming together is going to be negative. But the expected value, so I mean, like applying probabilistic reasoning, I think, massive contractions for UST, it gets less and less in terms of the total outstanding market cap of UST over time. And I think it's not something that happens so frequently as well as, like massive drop in Bitcoin. So I'm sort of betting that the long-term scenario of Bitcoin going up and the reserves being strong enough to withstand UST demand drops is more likely scenario.
Huh, okay. That's really interesting. And it makes sense though. So somebody on Twitter, when I asked what questions I should ask you, tweeted, why does he feel the need to buy Bitcoin to back Luna? Shouldn't Luna be solid enough based on the services provided? It shows a lack of faith in the product. But it's more what you were saying, that you can end up in these like downward spirals, or yeah, what's your response to that?
Well, so there's an economic argument why sort of diversifying the types of collateral that can protect UST is a sound strategy. But I think a second dimension that hasn't been actively discussed is the diplomatic argument. And the reason is, so Terra's goal is to be the largest decentralized money in crypto, period. Its goal is not to be the largest stablecoin in the Terra blockchain. So we're sort of expanding into, let's say, the Solana ecosystem, Avalanche, Ethereum, Polygon. So we plan to be everywhere where there are developers and users. Now, the thing is, different from growing stablecoin demand in the Terra ecosystem itself, where trust in UST is extremely high, when you go to and expand to these different ecosystems, then faith in Luna's collateral, Luna's fitness as collateral, is a lot less than what it is like in the Terra ecosystem. But if you have Bitcoin as collateral, then nobody in crypto really questions it because it is the apex asset. It has the soundest monetary policy. It has the most Lindy. So it builds valuable bridges to be able to be a more neutral asset as we expand cross-chain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But one thing is that, so if the Luna Foundation Guard or LFG is then using the Bitcoin to keep the peg and it's a centralized entity, then how does that affect the decentralization of UST?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So LFG is a vehicle that we put together in order to facilitate the initial capital formation of this Bitcoin reserve and to fund research such that we can have credible bridging options from Bitcoin to Terra, right? But ultimately, how this reserve system is going to look like is that it's going to be a smart contract which houses Bitcoin that's been bridged over to Terra. And then people can mint UST against it by depositing wrapped Bitcoin, bridged Bitcoin, and then vice versa, they can redeem UST against it, similar to how you would trade against an AMM.
So it's similar to wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum then, where there is a centralized entity, or did I misunderstand that?
No, so we're evaluating trust minimized bridges in a way that WBTC doesn't have those properties, right? Because it's basically a multi-sig held by BitGo. Whereas for this, we're exploring mainly light client based solutions.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, but obviously at the moment, I think bridges are just an area where there's sometimes security concerns. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on that? How to keep that secure?
I think the biggest problem with bridges now is because there is a competitive dynamic where you need to support as many layer ones as quickly as possible, right? So that leads to situations where a lot of the bridging teams can't spend time on core infrastructure because it's a land grab right now, right? So the bridge that connects to as many ecosystems as possible and facilitates as much bridging transfers are going to win because it's incredibly difficult to remove vendor lock-in once a certain bridge has a lot of market share. So which incentivizes a lot of these bridging teams to spend most of their time on integrations and business development rather than sort of making sure that the core infrastructure is secure. I think that is the fundamental problem with bridges today. But having said that, that doesn't mean that there is an inherent problem with trying to build a secure bridge from Bitcoin to a smart contract platform, especially if you remove a lot of the needs for that competitive dynamic from the equation.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll have to see how that develops. So someone else was also saying that they felt that it would be disruptive to Luna to buy so much Bitcoin. So how do you expect all of this to affect the price of Luna?
Yeah, so one of the common criticisms that we heard is, well, if before you were burning $1 worth of Luna for every dollar of UST that's minted, and now we're burning 60 cents of Luna for every dollar's worth of UST that's minted, then doesn't that mean that less value is accrued to Luna? And I think the answer is likely going to be no. And that's because even though the total share of the collateralization effect from minting UST is lessened through this change, I think overall we would be able to grow the pie of people that are willing to transact and hold UST across multiple different blockchains to a magnitude that wouldn't have been possible if UST only had one collateral counterparty, right? So by adding Bitcoin, I think we'd be able to win hearts and minds of a lot more people in crypto and a lot more users than just doing this solo. So I think the overall pie is going to get larger, even though the size that Luna would capture could potentially go down.
And have you noticed that a lot of Bitcoiners got very interested in what you were doing, and maybe you were interested in participating in the Terra ecosystem because of that?
So if you look at my Twitter inbox now, it looks like the Bitcoin talks forum.
And so what are people saying generally?
Like it or not, I think the Bitcoin community is the largest across all of crypto. It covers the widest possible audience. So like the Bitcoin community might be less active on Twitter because there are lots of people that use Bitcoin, love Bitcoin, might not work on it full time. But I think one of the things that Bitcoin has been needing is that there's a lot that has been said comparing Bitcoin to Ethereum and then thinking about what's going to be more valuable long term. And then the idea is that Ethereum is more useful. There's more things that you can do with it. So eventually it's going to flip Bitcoin. So a lot of people think this way. But I think precisely what gives Bitcoin its value is the fact that it's calcified and it's very slow to change to innovation, right? Similar to how, but like if you look at Ethereum, right, it changes less quickly than some of the other smart contract platforms, but it still changes all the time, right? And it's newer. It doesn't really have the same founding myth. It doesn't have, the same Lindy effect that Bitcoin does. So it's significantly a less credibly neutral asset, right? So I think from that perspective, there's a large and huge Bitcoin community that respects that value system, understands, the credible neutralness of the Bitcoin as an asset class. But what has been lacking is sort of a credible layer two, if you think about it. because Bitcoin is still very difficult to use, still very difficult to weave into smart contracts. And in Terra, it gets that. Not only does Bitcoin become a reserve currency for Terra USD, right? But it also gets a layer 2 on which it can be bridged and used across a multitude of different applications spanning from, let's say other DAOs that are building on Terra to NFTs to DeFi. And I think the possibilities of that are quite interesting because now Bitcoin only needs to be really good at being one thing, being an asset. And in terms of all the expressivity, the transaction capabilities, the throughput, all those things can happen on Terra.
And is the main difference, because I do feel like there were Bitcoiners who weren't very happy about the amount of Bitcoin that was being used in DeFi on Ethereum. But is the difference there that primarily was, being held by this centralized custodian? Is that why they're kind of more open to this than they were to the other version happening on Ethereum?
I think the primary thing that those Bitcoiners didn't like about that was that it was being done on Ethereum. One.
Oh.
And two, yeah, I think the fact that it had a centralized custodian has something to do with it. But I also think there's a healthy segment of Bitcoiners that bringing WBTC into Ethereum was a positive change.
And out of curiosity, this goes back to the security question, but I realize, so at the moment, you guys have already bought $3 billion worth of Bitcoin, as far as I understand. So how is that being secured?
So the Luna Foundation Guard has a council of about 7 people. So it's secured in a multi-sig held by the council members.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then you're going to figure out kind of how to use it in a more trustless way as you go, like at some point in the future?
Correct.
Okay. And then how have you been purchasing the Bitcoin in a way where, I'm sure you're trying to do it where you're not affecting the price?
It's a ongoing program. So I'm going to try to say less, but let's just say that we try to purchase Bitcoin whenever opportunity arises.
Okay. All right. It makes sense to me that you don't want to reveal all your secrets there. So, and then actually just to go back to the bridging, one other thing. So do you have a timeline of when you think that, whatever your plan is will be fully deployed?
Yeah, so we're actually going to put out a request for proposal today on Agora, which is Terra's research forum. And we're going to look for proposals from projects that are already looking at Bitcoin bridging solutions. So there's a number that focus on specifically this problem. So there's Axelar in the Cosmos ecosystem. So they have bridges to different chains, but they first sort of came to market with this idea that you can bring Bitcoin into Cosmos. Also, there's Nomic BTC, which is working on a similar problem. We were reached out to from the folks at Blockstacks. Yeah, and as a community, we'll evaluate some of these solutions. And then I think in the beginning, we'll try to dip our toes in with diversified distribution across several different bridging solutions. But I think over time, we'll see one or two that rise to the top.
So one thing was that I noticed in the announcement, or maybe in a blog post or somewhere, that the reason given for purchasing Bitcoin as collateral was that it was uncorrelated to Terra. And I think you said that over time, the reserve would be stocked with other uncorrelated assets. So what other assets do you have in mind, and how will you make those decisions about which ones to include?
Well, so like earlier, I noted that building exogenous forex reserves is driven as much by diplomatic arguments as by economic ones, right? So I think it makes sense that as we expand into different chains, if we sort of build a system whereby some portion of UST is being used to acquire the native staking assets of those chains, then in that case, I think we'll be able to buy a lot of goodwill and user comfort with that because, well, this is for obvious reasons.
Oh, but you're thinking crypto assets then?
Crypto assets, yes.
Oh, okay. It sounds like whatever chains you end up bridging to, those would be kind of prime candidates.
Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking that the vast majority of the value would be in Bitcoin, but I think there should be still small, Forex reserves on each of the smart contract platforms against which you can mint and redeem in native staking assets, because the user experience of that is much more friendly, right? So for example, if you're trying to mint on Solana, for instance, like you don't want to have to bridge Bitcoin over and then like Luna over and then try to mint something. Whereas like if you can just like burn Solana and then mint UST, then that's a very friendly user experience.
Yeah, it's much easier. So in terms of these assets in the Luna Foundation Guard Reserve, obviously Bitcoin and then whatever else you add, what will you be doing with that? Will you be lending it at all? Are we hypothecating it in any way? Or, what are your thoughts there?
No, we wouldn't touch it until the reserve system is ready to go.
Ready to go. No, but I mean, when it is ready to go, then it will only be, I guess, used for like minting and redeeming, or will you be doing anything additional with it?
So yeah, it wouldn't be deployed. It would just be put into like the easiest way of thinking about it is that once the bridging is ready, and then we're working on a very special type of DEX. It's kind of like a virtual AMM, whereby you can deposit UST and then deposit Bitcoin and people can trade against it. So once that's done, we will deposit and we will look to burn the keys once we feel like operator keys are no longer necessary.
Wait, I don't know if I fully understand. You're saying that this is the Bitcoin that's being put up as the reserve. You're going to essentially use it like as a liquidity pool on a DEX?
So how